All right, welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, Put a Fence Around Your Linux User Privileges, with Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President of Information Systems at BioReference Laboratories, Mike Molinaro. You're also joined by David from Beyond Trust, who will run through an overview and product demo of PowerBroker for Unix Linux at the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. It's going to be a good one. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. A kind reminder to please submit your questions anytime throughout the webinar. We'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. So now that that's all out of the way, I'd like to hand this on over to Mike, who's going to jump right in. Hello, Mike. Welcome. How are you? Please take it away. We're ready to hear from you.
Greetings and salutations to everybody in the not-so-internet land. And we'll try to intersperse this discussion, hopefully with some comedy. If not, we won't want it to be too dry. So I was asked by Security Current, and also in coordination with Beyond Trust, to give a perspective of dealing with identity access provisioning management. The 3 go together exclusively. With considerations in Linux, so I'll take you through a high 50,000-foot level and drop down as low as I can get in 30 to 35 minutes or 40 minutes or so. I work at BioReference Laboratories, so I'll take you into the next piece of next slide. So the interesting thing about BioReference Laboratories is we're in the healthcare segment. Some of you may or may not be in healthcare, but all of you probably have a keen interest in it since you've seen doctors, you've had blood tests, you've used diagnostic services. BioReference is the 3rd largest medical diagnostic company in North America. I don't know if I could say whether it's in the Western Hemisphere, but I definitely know it's between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. You may have heard other companies like LabCorp and Quest. LabCorp's 1, Quest 2, we're 3. So real quickly, we're a full clinical diagnostic laboratory. We have a lot of DNA. We gather DNA on a daily basis. We were just acquired about a little over a year ago from Opco Health, which does a whole series of other therapeutics and pharmaceutical endeavors. Our testing services are used by physicians' offices, clinics, hospitals, nursing homes, you name it, we're in it. We test for genetics, oncology, blood work. We have jails, even some segments of TRICARE for the Department of Defense. Just wanted to give you a breakdown on that. And the final piece is to give you an idea of how much we test. We do about 55,000 biological samples a day, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So we are a factory. With that, we need to make sure your data or our data doesn't get out in the internet and only gets to the people that are supposed to. Identity, access, and provisioning plays a large part in that game. A little bit about me. I am a drummer. I don't have my drum set on this webinar. I've asked. They might have wanted me to do it, but it would be very noisy. So little pictures there. I love baseball. I'm a Yankees fan. I was born in Jersey City. I come from a big family of firefighters in Hudson, Bergen, and Passaic County, New Jersey, right next to New York City. Some of you may know where that is. Spent 8.5 years in the United States Army, a little over 4 in the active duty in the Signal Corps, and then just about a little over 4 in the New Jersey National Guard. I was in the Signal Corps. One of the things I did was crypto repair, SATCOM repair, and computer systems and data centers. I have a team of people that I lead. I'm a big proponent of leadership, and I like building all manner of things, including human development. All right. You'll notice the South Park sign when I do my presentations down south. They don't seem to find that funny. However, I'm leaving it in there for today. Oh, so what are we going to talk about? Well, obviously it's identity access provisioning. You'll hear the term often. People will make this statement. You want to bake it in rather than bolt it on. This is very hard, especially if you're coming into a company where they haven't baked it in and they haven't even started to try bolting it on. With that statement, that's our job in security and IT and risk managers, is to find a way to start somewhere at a high level, get people on board, and then build this so that it gets baked in. Sometimes you have to do a combination of both, but at the end of the day, if we're not monitoring our identity, access, and our provisioning capabilities, or we don't have them, that leads us to the next one, the fog of war. We learn about that in the military. We also have that in business. With the fog of war, how do we know who's getting in, when they're getting in? Are they having the right access to the things that we want them to have access to? You know, this possibility, can we capture this information? Do we archive it? Do we conduct entitlement reviews, also known as re-access certification? And how do we provision? Do we provision for the life cycle of the user, or is it just a spot provisioning where we can forensically go back and look at it? So we'll talk about some of that today. The next thing you want to do is to take a look at your service management capabilities. Do you have that? Business process management software usually works well for that. You'll hear us talk about a little bit today about log management, security incident event management systems, access tools, access control tools, which Beyond Trust will get into more detail on how their tool applies to this subject. Next thing is identity, access, and provisioning has a lot to do with risk management. So you want to have that risk-managed approach, which is bake it in as opposed to bolt it on. To manage your risk, you have to be aware of it. I'm sure everybody here checks their checking account and their bank accounts regularly just to make sure something's not going wrong. So I would make a safe bet that we should be checking access on a regular basis. And if you're in a large company or even a medium-sized company, you can't do that unless you have an electronic capability. It's got to be automated. You can't do it manually. And you don't want to waste your time assigning people to try to do it manually. The next thing is deploying tools in a risk-managed approach and putting in process. It's got to be traceable. You got to be able to repeat it. You have to be able to put it in a controlled environment, and you have to be able to report on that. And then I'll show you some logs we look at BioReference in our Linux environments so that you have an idea of the logs that you would read and the actual parameters around those logs. So hopefully it's informative and I don't act too much like a goof guy. With that, I'm going to go on to the next thing. We're going to set some ground rules for this game. On these ground rules, it kind of sets you up at a high level of things that you should be considering and things you should be planning into whenever you're deploying systems, process, and technology. Just keep in mind, I need to stress this, access isn't just a tool. It's a combination of process and procedure, tools to be able to give you information and gather information and collect information, and then the people themselves. The company needs to be on board with this. If the company's not on board with this, such as HR, the CEO, I dare say, I can't even say that a CIO or CISO would argue this point, so they're going to be on board automatically. Various business units, we have laboratories all over the country, so they're on board with this here as well. So you're going to need to get stakeholders to be on board with this, and you're going to need someone driving the engagement because it's going to affect everybody in the company. With that, so periodically you'll hear the term new digital currency. Well, one of these digital currencies is access. We do a lot of vulnerability testing, a lot of penetration testing with my department on applications, on process, on systems, and any type of automated system. If you want to get into a company's environment, try to find weak access. This reason stands ground whether you're in the military or whether you're in a civilian company. If I can gain access to your environment, I can then begin the process of manipulating, whether that's just watching, trolling around, or whether that is just putting in information that will change your opinion on things. There's all manner of misdirection you can do, or stealing the data outright. What I'd like to say here is access governance is a main component of privacy and security that it needs to be implemented, and you need to optimize it. And that has to be tied to your rights management. All of that is a major risk issue. I'll make this statement. Anybody who gains access to you from outside and gets into your environment inside, we'll use inside loosely, now is an internal threat. Over my career, the majority of the threats are generally internal. I worry about external problems, but mostly I worry about people gaining access in. So I spend a lot of time making sure that the access is turned off or removed. Again, you got to orchestrate people process, and you have to leverage controls and capabilities. With that, it is expected from your customers. Your executives should be demanding that, so that means you'll have to educate them, and regulators and auditors are going to enforce that. I'd like to make a recommendation. You'll have access to the slide deck. This slide deck you guys can use, anybody that wants to use this as a foundation for presenting this to executives, to people in the company, gives them a comfortable feeling. I've used these in board meetings, executive management meetings, gives people a comfortable feeling that they have information that somebody about identity access provisioning, and that the information is reasonably accurate. With that, a big picture with red circles on it. As we would say in New Jersey, bada bing. When I'm done, it'll be the bada boom. So there's a lot of areas where you have a security program. Then you have, the program is tied or interweaved into security functional areas. And then you have tools and processes. So today's discussion actually fits into the red areas. We'll talk a little bit about authoritative sources today. And I'll give you an idea that an authoritative source is your HR database. An authoritative source gives you one single taxonomic methodology or number or system to identify a single person that is tied to that person. And then provisioning. You're going to need to provision people. Then you're going to need to tie things together like your general and privileged user management. And this, keep in mind, this is across all systems, whether they're Windows, Unix, Linux. The fundamentals that I'm talking about today apply to any operating system, any application, any storage system. They all operate on the premise of you need identity, access, and provisioning. One thing I didn't circle is policies and procedures. You need to make sure that the policies and your procedures are actually executed on. And identity management is a tough one. Today's discussion is about identity access and provisioning. Just so you know, you need to do all three, but you need to start somewhere. And I generally start with provisioning. Provisioning is who gets access, when they get access, and how they get access, who they talk to. So the goal is to do all three. But if you start with provisioning and then access controls, that's a good start. And then later on, you can tie the identity. Identity usually is a little bit more difficult. If you haven't seen this, this is a good way that you can present to your executive or senior management teams to give them an idea of how all of the security stuff, all this risk stuff ties into the way the company operates, the way business and customers use things. I'll make one point. There, in quality management, you have two concepts. You have a stated and unstated quality point. You need to be clear which is unstated and stated. So an unstated quality point is customers in any company or dealings with a company expect, without having to say, that you're going to secure their stuff. All right? We're finding out in today's internet of things, this IoT world we live in, we're finding out that that's not actually real. Some companies don't even consider that they're going to secure somebody's data. They may actually hide it in contracts. So you need to be clear that people aren't expecting a certain type of expectation, and they think it's unstated, and you think it's a stated expectation. And this is a good concept for IT in general, or engineering in general. It's nice that the plane has landing gears. That should not be unstated. You definitely need to make sure that that's a stated type of quality. It's the same thing with security. A lot of executives and a lot of customers, they make assumptions that we do things that we may not be doing. So be aware of that and clarify that up front. So now that we kind of understand the fabric of where security and risk and everything ties into with the business, we talked about things that are stated and unstated expectations and requirements. I thought I'd talk about this a little bit. So ultimately, in a company, we're going to access data. And this data may be consisting of 18 critical identifiers that you have in healthcare, which are information about the actual person. Street, town, date of birth, first name, last name, medical health information number. These are data entities that are pretty much ubiquitous across a lot of your systems. You have to be aware that when you're building data systems, databases, SOA or software as a service, any type of thing where you're building software and data, you need to have a good idea how to assign access to that data, whether it's an application that needs access to service accounts or whether humans are going to access this data through an application. You need to kind of keep track of that. So I put a chart together. If you're doing a data management, security, and risk process within your company, the main areas that I've circled on your data management wheel, the wheel of fortune, and if we put colors in there, we could probably call that a spinning wheel of data death. These are the areas where identity access and provisioning play into. Database operations and management, your data security management framework and methodologies and controls, your document and content management. Remember, this data is going to be put into documents, and you're going to need to control that. Your metadata management is just as important as the actual data, because it's the data that tells you all manner of things about the data. And then you have data architecture. Remember, data architecture, you have to bake in security. You can't consider building a data architecture and then forget about security, and then forget about access controls and access management and tracking of that. So it's a life cycle. Your data is in a life cycle. This is a nice little chart for anybody who wants to be able to explain in one slide what your data world looks like and where security actually is applied to that in terms of security and access and provisioning. So we'll move on. This is a very busy slide. I thought it would take the time as we're setting this all up to give an idea of service management a bit, demand management, or what I'll call value delivery. I'm a proponent of IDLE. I teach IDLE. I'm a proponent of PMBOK. I'm kind of encyclopedic, and I actually use systems here at BioReference and in other companies to deploy these things. The areas that you're going to be concerned about in terms of access and provisioning are with vendor and asset management practices and people on-site or off-site. Vendor management in terms of access is very important. Vendors can take your information out. They can become inside threats, so you need to be able to track them. If you look at the numbers, that's the, in parentheses, those are the high-level controls in IDLE. IDLE actually identifies controls for access management, control of access management within vendor and asset management. IDLE very quickly is broken into four major components, which is strategy, design, transition, and operations. So if you want to bake things in, strategy and design is the area where you're going to make declarations. real high level, again, if you look at the top of the document, you'll see a concept called statement of applicability. I stole a little bit from ISO, International Standards Organization, which companies sometimes will try to achieve 27,001 and 2 certification or accreditation. I kind of do that with an IDLE. Your statement of applicability says that these are the things that your company, your IT department, your executive management team is willing to, put their money where their mouth is. So if you look from strategy to operations, you'll see all manner of interesting things from strategy, things like you're going to adopt CISO, you're going to have an enterprise IT architecture, you're going to have demand management. Design then takes into consideration how to design these things in, such as capacity, IT architecture, vendor asset management, service level management. Service transition, very important for a company. Access and provisioning are very important as well. Your change management, your documentation library, your document management, release management, test management, and under test management is all your quality management. I'll make a quick outline here. Quality management is not QA. Quality management is the overarching paradigm and framework of how you deploy quality assurance standards and then the actual quality control components. And this is very important in identity access and provisioning because you have to test those things. And then the final part is service operations. Service operations, the key here is access management. You handle incidents, you handle security incidents, you do escalations, you have problem management. However, access management is a big one. Linux systems have to be incorporated as much as Microsoft and Active Directory. You have to incorporate your Linux systems in your access management requests for infrastructure, application security, your physical security. I dare say today some of your physical security systems will run on Linux operating systems. I have that issue here. We have lots of camera systems, and they actually run a Linux operating system on some of them. I believe GTE Commander is one of them. I collect that information, and I have to know which logs to actually collect for that. So this is a handy slide that you can use if you're coming around trying to figure out how to do your provisioning and how to do your service management components. Offline, I could talk about tools I've been successful with, but that's the high level. It's a bit busy, but it gives you an idea. So now we've got some high-level concepts, what your company would like to do. We've made some declarations. Let's connect some of the dots together right now. Let's fill in some of the gaps and start looking at some design and architecture. Right? First of all, fundamentals of risk and controls is your access and the sensitivity level in that access. You should require access based on context, time, and sensitivity. They do this in the military. Things are top secret, they're secret. They have various different levels of what sensitive documents are, and they define those. Access management rights and controls have to be built into your AAA systems, AAA being authentication, authoritative, and accounting systems, such as Active Directory. And say you're using Sun 1 for Linux. You need to have some way to identify sensitivity, time, and context. And from a control perspective, we'll just brush on that real quick. You need to determine which are going to be detective, preventative, corrective, and hybrid. And hybrid basically is Bill and Jazz. What level of corrective, preventative, and detective you want to mix together to come up with an idea on what's going on in your situational awareness. Content access, websites, web systems, applications, they're going to be the highest, what I see is the highest risk. I have a risk register at my company that I put together with my team, and I can make a statement. Number one problem is botnets, malware, and malware trying to gain access or lock access out as number one problem. Just virus issues and malware in general. That's the number one cyber problem we have. Number two is access. in any company, I found access is usually right up there. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And number 3 is usually process. And the problem is process is usually sneakernet. It's run by people. People sit in transitions rather than in states. It should be in a state, and systems should run transitions. Computers handle change well. Humans don't handle change well. So that would be my top 3. Generally, in the last 3 or 4 companies I've been in, that was the top 3. Things that companies leave out. They think Microsoft Active Directory is the end-all to be-all. It's the world. It's the world that people think exists. That's the universe. I work in an environment where it's not all Microsoft. I have Unix systems. I have Linux systems. I have Microsoft systems. We use all 3. All 3 have to work well together. And so you need to start thinking about how do you homogenize your access at a high level, and how that content looks so that it can be ubiquitous across your organization. If you're predominantly Microsoft, then what you can do is tie Linux and Unix to Microsoft in some manner. John Trust has ideas on that kind of stuff, and he'll talk about later. The content being accessed has to have levels. I've provided that sensitivity levels for you. Our data is sensitivity, categorized in sensitivity as public, anonymized, confidential, sensitive, and restricted. Obviously, you don't want anybody getting restricted data. That's a bad thing. Access control sensitivity levels. You need to apply least right privileges. You need to determine groups, roles, and rights to your access controls. You need to understand how they apply to each other. You need to involve your IT and lines of business. They need to provide to you the requirements for rights, roles, groups, access controls. And what does least right privileges mean? If you're in a healthcare environment, you have to do your best to abide by least right privileges. The next one is validate, monitor, and report. If you're not monitoring, if you don't have somebody responsible for monitoring and their roles aren't segregated well, I call that letting the inmates run the prison. Coming from a family of firefighters and police officers, that's where I got that from. And my cousin, who was the warden of the Passaic County Jail, said, you never let the inmates run the prison. If you're in a jail, that's probably a bad thing. If you're running access controls, that's not a good thing. So there should be a team that has the ability to monitor behavior. In our company, that's the Enterprise Risk and Security Group. And they should be able to report on that and notify people. Build it in such a manner where you can work together with people. You're not a police force. You're helping the business get better. Authorization by the management. Who authorizes access and process? Authentication. What systems are going to drive that authentication? You should have that defined out. Identity. That increases your accuracy of your non-repudiation, which is who is it really getting into your system. You should have your eye on your authoritative sources. We use, and I've used in other companies, the HR database. For vendors, we build one in a actual system, whether identity access system. Beyond Trust has something that you could build that in as well. And then how do you correlate between access and sensitivity and context? Again, you have to look at the information and what is required from the media and medium of context. Then you have to understand what is the target of that content, and then the role and responsibility of access. Somebody may look at the same context and content, or let me stand corrected. They may look at the same content but under a different context that may require different type of access. So it can get tricky with context, content, and access with their roles. Moving on. So what I've laid out for you here on this next slide is if I were to look at logs and how I were to look at access and monitor access, what would be the parameters in which I would be very interested? Mike Molinaro and our department, our group, is very interested in these 8 attributes. I'll go over them real briefly one at a time. We want to audit account logon for failure and success. Both are important. Success could become a static noise, but you can correlate that in any one of your systems so that it can tell you who's getting too much success as opposed to too average success. You'll be able to tune over time, and then you want to know when the accounts are failing. Obviously, if somebody is attempting to access your system 1,000 times in 1 minute and it's failed, that's something you should be worried about. Especially in a Linux system that will generally be web-facing. Linux systems and Unix systems have a tendency to be web-facing. Failures are important. Account management failure. Real quickly, that's generally defined on the system you're in and the type of account management you have. Any type of directory service. And I say directory service because there are different types. Oracle has Internet Directory. Sun has a Sun1 directory. Microsoft has their Active Directory. Lockdown events and failures. Moving on to that next one. Again, events. Events may not specifically be focused on the account, but could be service accounts. And then objects, depending on the software and the systems you're looking at, object access failure. That's important. Applications will generally see that. And any type of policy changes. So somebody has the ability within your Linux or your Microsoft or any type of system, if they make a policy change, you want to know about that. And then privileged use, specifically tie any type of administrators, people who have root, super users, SA accounts, you want to know about that. And then event failure for privileged users. So this is a nice little list of things that may apply to your organizations and that you can use as requirements in a requirements list. And they apply to Linux, Unix, Microsoft, just about any other computing system. We'll move on to the next one, my parade of logs. Again, you're going to hear the concept logs. Logs are important. Before I was at BioReference, I was at Bright House Networks. At Bright House Networks, I was a CIO and Chief Security Officer. We looked at a lot of stuff, and we dealt with law enforcement and the government on a very often basis. And the one thing I know the FBI, Secret Service, Defense Intelligence Agency, any of these organizations within the government will tell you, especially the FBI if they're coming in after a data breach, I want to see your logs. And so you have to have a plan for archiving your logs, for having some type of terms and limits on how long you will do your security logs. Usually compliance will give you that answer. And then you should have those targets of evaluation designed out. They should be defined and designed. And in this case, what I've done is I've thrown out on the meat grinder here logs that we look at in our Linux systems. Now, we have a homogeneous group of Linux systems. We use CentOS. We have Red Hat. I've actually seen various different types of Linux systems in our labs. A lot of our test equipment, where we do blood testing, our automated systems, they'll use various different versions of that for the equipment itself. So I've given you basically a log list of things to look at to actually collect in your SIM, collect in whatever your tool you're going to be using, and obviously logs, your security logs for authentication logs, they're important. Login records, usually the WTMP or the log UTMP, they're really important. Then the authentication logs, those are really important. Failed logon attempts in Unix. So now we're getting into a little nitty-gritty. And then logs of interest would be the boot. Now, if you have a SIM or you have a tool that deals with identity access and provisioning, correlating between your boot information and your authentication log and your failed attempts, you could set use cases up that give you an idea of how access may be occurring in terms of irregular behavior. And then I dare say you should have Apache logs. The list to the right would be of high interest and would be your priority list of logs. Just understand that some highlights there is very often you're going to run MySQL off of Linux. So you're going to want to see the MySQL log. You're going to want to know about errors. These are also correlatable within any of the tools that may be presented today or discussed, previously discussed. Sometimes your ring buffer messages, if they're correlated with other messages, will give you information that would be useful in incident management, security, and other. And then execution of messages due to failure, we hear cron. And then I haven't had too much use of the mail log. It's very mail-centric, but I threw it in there because somebody may be using that in your companies, in your labs, or in schools. You might see that in a school. We have a lot of different labs. So that's your Pareto box. I thought that would be useful for anybody building requirements to want to be able to do identity access and provisioning. These would be the logs that you'd want to monitor and you'd want to test for abnormal behavior or normal behavior. In some cases, it's hard to determine what's abnormal or normal until you baseline. And you can't baseline unless you know what you want to look at. Moving on. So I won't dwell on this slide deck real quick, but what I did is I put together a series of access control and provisioning requirements that you would want to put in your requirements list. And this applies very good to Linux. It's usually often overlooked, but basically you've got what I've taught previously. We want to recap access management for all applications, Linux, Unix, Microsoft, and other. You want to have everybody on the team in on the secret so that it's not a secret. You have to kind of identify real quick what type of access control, whether it's attributable, role-based. Then you want to identify that you're going to have an access lifecycle, and you have to do that. And that consists of identity, access controls and centralization of it, and then the access provisioning. You should tie all three of those together. That's a whole presentation all by itself, an entitlement review process, and try to maintain a one-to-one ratio between all of the systems. With that, I'll move on to here. All I want to talk about on this real quick is I provided what a design would look like, how all of the different systems would interact with each other, knowing that you would have Linux directory services, Linux systems, Novell systems, Apple, Unix, and knowing that you have to wrap your control mechanisms and interact with every other system on your network. It's kind of like a human body. Coming from a medical diagnostics company, they all kind of have to be plugged together and working relatively good. I figured the users on this discussion would appreciate a design, an overall architecture that accounts for process, systems, the various tools on those systems, and how it's stacked up, down, right, and left, and then where the rest of your production world exists and how that's all connected in there. So use this as you need, and where you see the box with Beyond Trust, you can put Oracle Identity Manager in that. You could put the CA in there. I don't want to knock Beyond Trust, but I put them in there as they're going to be talking a little bit today. But this identity access governance and the access management component, you can replace those with the pieces that you actually need. Beyond Trust, I'm sure, is hoping that it would be them. If you have questions at some point, I believe Security Current will give out my email. You can ask me questions about it. And then the next one is a block diagram of process and flowing through process and connectors and your access controls. I think this would be a good picture for executives if you modified it. I think it's useful for letting your executive team know that access is the new cyber. It's the new cyber currency. They want your data, but they want access to your systems to get your data. With that, I'm going to let David from Beyond Trust, take it away.
Hey, David, you might need to jump off of mute. We can't hear you yet.
Hello, everyone. Great, thank you. Is it good now?
It's great.
I'm going to
Thank
assume
you.
yes. Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Grendis. I work with Beyond Trust here, and I'm going to focus on where we fit in that whole model and everything that we just spoke about. So as you can see here, I've got my PowerBroker Unix and Linux slide up, and we're going to talk about privilege management, so that falls right in line with that least right or least privilege, as well as session management. The idea there is going to be more on the monitoring and reporting side. Now we can speckle all throughout the model that we've just talked about in many different places and ways, but this is more, now that I'm on a system, I've gained access to that Linux host, what can I do here? And that's something that's very a unique type of scenario on your Unix and Linux systems. And that's because we have that root account that kind of can do everything, and that's where kind of it ends and stops in many cases for as built-in least privilege goes on these systems. But first I wanted to talk about a helicopter view of Beyond Trust and the different things we can do here. We've talked about we have the ability to do password safe. That's now managing the passwords on all the various systems throughout your organization, Windows, Unix, Linux, routers, firewalls, and so on, taking those keys to the kingdom out of the admin's hands in many cases. Privilege management across your different platforms. We're going to talk here. We're going to spend the rest of the conversation right there. And then, of course, we do have areas of vulnerability management as well as AD bridging or our identity services, and even auditing what takes place within your Active Directory in other systems. But when we talk and focus on PowerBroker, Unix, and Linux, what it's going to bring to the table is the ability to, of course, eliminate the need to know whatever that root account password is. And then when we do allow you to effectively elevate and run various commands or sets of commands based on your role within the organization, we're going to track it, log it, as well as provide visibility and audit. What did you do with these commands? Finally, we can control this not only at the command level, but even at the system level, and that's actually the part which we'll be showing today. Real quick, PowerBroker, Unix, and Linux. What are its components? Essentially, there's a client piece. Anytime I want to elevate and send a command, I would prefix it with pbrun. That'll send it off to our policy piece, the policy server that says, are you allowed to run this command? The nice part about this is now we're talking about a policy server or servers, but this is central. This allows now for centralized management. Yet another thing that you'll see with native tools that can be cumbersome is managing this. So with our solution, we now have central management of policy, and in doing so, we'll be able to provide centralized event logging and session recording. So we can see a user issues a command, policy server says, am I allowed or are you authorized to run this command? If the answer is yes, we then execute that command on behalf of the end user, all the while logging it. And then finally, the logging's great, but we're going to also be able to, rather than just at the command level, we've seen over the years, you know, there's a lot of clever people out there, whether they're your own administrators or people with more nefarious, you know, intentions. They'll work to get around this. They'll do things such as, I found scripts that you can run as root. Well, let me put my commands in there. Or we need access to, you know, maybe you have use cases where we need to provide read-only access to files owned by root. That's where we can come in and help out with our advanced control and audit. Basically bringing that command control that you're used to, but also taking it all the way down to the system level, meaning, you know, hey, I don't want the user to modify the Etsy password file. Well, maybe there's 6 different tools that they could use to do that. We don't have to worry about those 6 tools. We'll just say you can't modify the Etsy password file or any of the various directories and anything across your file system. And in doing that, we're going to also allow you to audit and see. And I've got 3 different audit reviews here. One of them is going to be more of your working audit view, where we can go ahead and search across, you know, different events that have taken place, or even all the way down to, you know, the various commands or IO logs. We can query across those. Then you can look at more of a statistical view, what's going on across my environment. These are all the types of things that our solution will bring to the table. So next, I'm going to jump into the product demonstration to show some of this in action. So I'm going to switch on over here real quick to my system, and I've logged on to this host as Lin1. I'm logged on here as a directory user. What I'd like to do next, my Lin1 host is actually my policy server. So I'm going to head on out to Lin2 as my user, Carrie. Carrie Swanson, you'll note I didn't have to enter in a password there. That's because we took advantage of PowerBroker Identity Services, which is our AD bridge. So this was a Kerberized authentication. So just as gaining access to a Windows host, you don't re-log in every time, we can also provide that functionality to all of your Unix and Linux systems across the board. But when Carrie wants to elevate, she would do something like pb run ID, and we can see that this has now sent that command off to our central policy server, logged it. This dialog here is something I put in place just to sort of describe what's going on, and then ultimately that command runs. Of course, you'd expect to see that from a product such as ours. The neat part, though, is all of that now is also going to be available right up here at the audit console. But that's basically your standard command elevation, which I'd like to, we'll set that guy here while it's loading actually. But what I wanted to show was the more advanced features. So for example, we can cd down into, say, my scripts directory and take a look in there, and I've got a number of scripts, and we can see that they're in fact owned by root, and I am not. So I could do something like pb run ID, pb run bash, and grab an entire bash shell. Now we could put least privilege in place, of course, to say only what I could do. In this case, so I've given Carrie the ability to check out that bash shell, but I'm going to indelibly audit everything that's done on Lin Server 1. So this isn't taking place and being sent out to Lin Server 1 auditing. We're actually auditing in real time on Lin Server 1. So this is an indelible audit trail. So you then can go in and take a look at, say, the script. We can see in here, it's going to do a few things, issue some commands, cat out on the shadow and password file. It's even going to try and shut down the system, okay? So we'll go ahead and add our own commands in here. Whatever that might be. We go ahead and we can see that I can't actually write to this file. We can see that we're root, it's owned by root, but we can't. So part of that is the advanced control, and based on Carrie's role in this organization, I've said, you know, and ultimately her group memberships and AD in this example, it says, yes, you can check out a root shell, but you can have just read access to the scripts directory. Can we execute it? Yes. We can go ahead, we'll start the script as root, and if you remember, it's completed, and we can see in here, if we recall, that shutdown command was in there, and you can see that root in this example doesn't have access. As long as Carrie's got this root account now, she doesn't have access to that particular binary. Now we'll go ahead and exit out of that particular session to show more of a least privileged approach, and we're going to get back to that, by the way. Maybe I want to edit host or edit the host file on a system. Well, pb run can also do remote command execution. There were three components. We have the client that sends the command off to the policy server that says, can Carrie run it? And if the answer is yes, the agent executes the command on whichever host. So I can set it up to where I could submit commands, if we get this right, pb run rather than -h, and I would say, you know, maybe out on Lin 1, I want to edit hosts. And we have to get it correct. Sorry, on Lin 2, we will go out and issue the edit host command. And what that'll do is allow her to open up that file and go ahead and see here, Carrie's not authorized. In this case, least privilege. We're not going to let her do it. However, we certainly can otherwise. So that would be our edit host command. What I'd like to do is take a quick step over to our Lin server here and take a look at what we've got going on. Again, we've got ID, pb run, play session. In this case, I've used PowerBroker Unix and Linux to take a look at the various sessions that we've got. I can see Carrie opened the one there on FI10. This is now that auditing capability. I can space on through and take a look at everything she's done within that file. We can see that she tried to do certain commands. I can backspace through. T will tell me what time was it when this was taking place. F would allow me to query across all of my IO logs. They're being indexed. And then Q would allow me to quit out. And that's usually what your IO logs would look like Granted, we have a centralized place for this, but you could capture that type of information in some cases without us. But I'm going to descend down into my IO logs directory. In fact, I'll do a have to be root to do so. And if we do an ls minus LTR, we can see Carrie's log down there. And I'll do a PB replay. And then we'll take a look. So that -- audit is what we're bringing to the table over and above what you might have seen before. And if we paste that in here and take a look within that same IO log we just looked at, now I can see access not only what did Carrie do within that session that I clicked through and see the commands that she ran, but I can see her interaction with the file system. You know, when she went and tried to issue the unlink, that was blocked. When the script ran and it tried to shut down the system, again blocked. And then finally when Carrie tried to go ahead and run that shutdown minus now with the argument. So you can see now the level of audit information is much greater than you might have get even with your standard session logging. Also, I dropped into the bash shell as root. Commonly, that event, if it were sent to the SIEM, would say, Carrie issued a command, you know, sudo space bash root. Now I'm root and nothing else is going to be audited as Carrie. But we can now look at the history of that particular session, if we can spell it right. And there it was. We descended into the scripts directory, went out and go ahead and tried the ls in there. We looked at it, we tried to edit our script, and then ultimately there was the blocked shutdown command. So that's the type of insight tools that BeyondTrust brings you will have. And this, again, we're focusing on the Unix and Linux side, but we can go well beyond that into your various other platforms. We've looked at it at the command line view, and I'll just take one more minute over here to show you that we're also have that same type of information can be accessed through what we call Beyond Insight. This is our IT risk security platform. It apparently is not playing nicely at the moment, so we may set that one aside since I only had 30 seconds anyhow. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for any sort of questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I was going to turn it over to the quick poll and Q&A.
Okay, perfect. If you could pull up that last slide, and thanks so much, David. Okay, guys, let's jump into our last poll. We had a bunch of questions come in, so I want to make sure we have time for those. But before we get into questions, let's just jump into our last poll. Would you be interested in engaging with one of our security experts further? We would love to chat or walk you through a more thorough one-on-one demo. So let us know. Select yes. I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive into questions for a few minutes. David, this came in for you. Does PowerBroker have alerting to outside tools like Remedy?
Yes. Yep. We can alert. We can send all of our information out to over syslog. We have connectors specific to Remedy and your other various SIEMs as well. We also have integration. I didn't talk about it, but our I was issuing commands based on Carrie's role within the organization. We can take anything into context, and one of those is actually both Remedy and ServiceNow, is to say, you know, is there a ticket? And if there is, I might have to enter my ticket information before I can elevate to root or have access to run various commands. So we do have multiple integration points with service desks in general.
Cool, thank you. Okay, let's jump right back over to Mike. We had a couple questions from you. Mike, a major function of tracking users is provisioning. Do you provision all users to include privileged users in Linux systems within your organization?
Answer is yes. I use a Serena Business Process Manager for our service system, and a user will contact the service desk. They'll say we need access, and it'll be specific. They'll say we need privileged or administrative rights, which then the service desk technician will immediately hit a button that sends it over to my service operations guy, security service operations guy, and then we have a whole process that's automated just for that, for getting approvals for privileged user access. When that's all approved and done, then it automatically sends it back. It automatically sends it back to the service technician to say, privileged user for Linux systems, Unix systems, any type of privileged system is approved, it's been tracked, go ahead and take care of that, and here's the information, and the user is taken care of.
Okay, question again for you, David. So does PowerBroker also allow monitoring or brokering Cisco or network gear?
We do. To be honest, that would actually fall more into our PowerBroker password safe. So PowerBroker Unix and Linux is a host-based least privilege, meaning there's an agent there. If you're looking at those Cisco devices, we're not going to be able to install agents out there, and in those cases we would do more of a management of that admin password, and then we would broker the connection to the target host, essentially sitting in the middle of it, and we could audit and even filter commands at that level.
Okay, another one for you, David, since you're already on the line. Coming from Ron. In the federal space, PIV and CAC card integration is something that is becoming more and more necessary. How does PowerBroker integrate with these types of cards?
Well, we within that system, everywhere where I was typing in passwords, we can certainly integrate. For example, rather than just user ID and password, we do have the ability to configure our systems to use certificate-based auth, which fits right in with the PIV access. So if you needed a PIV card when logging into a Linux host, we could provide it, or even if it was to log into the BI system or to check out passwords from our safe, all of those can be integrated with PIV access.
Great question. Mike, another question for you. Do you log access to all Linux users for compliance as well as security purposes? And do you review them weekly or monthly, quarterly, annually? How often do you review them?
Absolutely. So all DMZ-based systems, Unix systems in the company, we actually log that on our SIM. Our SIM then goes through and has a vulnerability index or risk index. So if something bad happens, we're notified right away if it's at a certain level or higher. And then at least every other week, we go through, look at the different indexes and look at who got in and got off. We also have we can run reports. We're going through that tuning right now that allows us to look at the top 10 problem children, the low 10 users. We have those reports automatically coming out. So we continually monitor that. Now, if you're a healthcare company, you're required to do that. Now, a lot of healthcare companies don't do that. If you're in SOX, COVID and CISO identify you should be doing that. There's controls that are identified for that. And in PCI, absolutely. In PCI, any of your Category 1 and Category 2 systems, you need to be monitoring your access controls. And I've seen some documents come out for PCI where they're specifically worried about Linux and Unix, where they may not be tied into a central system. That's of more concern to them because, like I said, they're usually very web-facing, which is a much higher concern for credit cards and health information.
Okay, guys, we are at the top of the hour, so I want to be cognizant of everybody's time and wrap this up. I did receive a bunch of questions asking about the recording and the slides, and yes, you will be receiving an email with links to both of those, the recording and the PowerPoint slides shown here today, within 2 business days from now. It will come from communications@beyondtrust.com, so make sure that that email alias is whitelisted within your email program so that you receive it without interruption. A big thanks again to our speakers. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for walking our audience through this great topic and super engaged audience today, so we really appreciate it. Again, everybody who attended live today, thank you guys so much for being here. We'll see you guys at our next webinar next week with Paula Januszkiewicz. It's going to be a good one, talking about hacking the antivirus. So we hope to see you guys next week. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and goodbye. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.